My name is Ruth Darlington. I am a member of the Eco Justice Collaborative of Philadelphia Yearly Meeting and a member of Medford Friends Meeting in New Jersey. And I'm so happy to welcome all of you tonight to this Eco Justice webinar on climate and money. I also want to thank Quaker Earth Care Witness for being our co-sponsor and publicizing this event across their wide North American network. I have a feeling that's why I'm seeing some of the faces that I'm seeing here tonight. So that's wonderful. For those of you who don't know the Eco Justice Collaborative, it has for several decades been the nurturing home for friends who find that acting on climate and social and economic justice is a vital part of their spiritual journey. And as part of that, we have nurtured individual projects, but we've also sponsored both all-day gatherings and webinars on a variety of topics, from greening sacred spaces to electrifying just about everything, to building resilient communities. And that's just a start. We also publish a monthly newsletter with actions and events and resources that we hope you'll take advantage of. Thank you all for joining the program tonight. If you didn't hear before, we do invite you to put in the chat who you are and where you're from so that we all can get to know one another. Before we begin tonight's program, and while we wait for some latecomers to join us, perhaps we could have a few minutes of centering silence. Thank you, everyone. I've noticed a few more people coming in. I want to say welcome to you and ask you if you are inclined to put your name and where you're from in the chat. So now for the program that you all came to hear. Personal decisions are critical. Some are pretty familiar to all of us. Consumption, for example, what we buy, how much we buy, how it's packaged, whether it's recyclable or not, and how sustainable and fair its sourcing is. Another thing many of us have been thinking about is our home energy choices, including appliances, cars, and heating and cooling. Maybe less widely considered is where we keep our money and where we invest it, although I expect that many of us here have begun giving some attention to that as well. Anything we do in any of these areas matters. And as Pamela pointed out, conversations with friends and family to help them make some of these decisions can multiply the impact of those decisions. We're assuming that most of you are already engaged in ways of making your personal decisions and choices more earth-friendly, and or have resources at hand to help you start making those decisions. If you're looking for more helpful resources, we're going to drop a few good ones in the chat, including Friendly Households and Jenny Ratcliffe's Money Guide. And I also want to thank our panelists for all of the resources that they've provided, and thank Claire for getting all of that information into the chat for us. But the sum of those individual choices, no matter how many we make and how good they are, isn't enough to make the systemic changes that we need. I'm sure many of you have heard Bill McKibben's response when someone asked what individuals could do to make a difference. And his answer was, work together, stop acting like an individual. So that's what we have to do. We can't make all the changes we need individually. We have to work together. What we want to offer tonight are some different ways we can act together to begin to address the money systems that we need to change if our grandchildren are going to have a livable future. This is hard. In fact, it can feel way too big, too complicated, and for many of us, it brings up all of our feelings of discouragement and despair, which is why tonight we are so happy to bring to you 4 women who have braved the territory of climate and finance and are engaged in campaigns to make those big shifts and show us how they've done it. We hope they inform you, inspire you, and open up new possibilities for action. Before I introduce our first panelist, I want to remind people to put your questions in the Q&A, not the chat, because it'll make it a lot easier for us to find them at the end of each presentation, which is when we are going to be having questions. And I also want to thank those of you who have submitted questions ahead of time. Our first panelist tonight is Renee Hansen. Renee is a climate activist and writer, formerly a member of Minneapolis Friends Meeting, and more recently a member of University Friends Meeting in Seattle. He's the author of Watershed, Attending to Body and Earth in Distress, which weaves a love song to the waters of her Minneapolis homelands together with stories from her climate refugee students. Renee, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks much, Ruth, for that. And it's all of Minnesota watersheds that I wrote about and love, but not just Minneapolis. I'm a northern Minnesotan mostly. But now in Washington, and I'm going to speak to you as I feel like a very little person in this big topic, but I'll speak about the ways that I've found to act both in Minnesota and Washington, and hope that those will be ways that can stimulate you to find your own methods to work with others. I taught for 31 years at Minneapolis College, formerly Minneapolis Community and Technical College. Um, and there, they nicely, without my noticing much, put aside money for my retirement, which was a very good thing because I didn't have any to put aside myself. But when I began to pay attention, I found that it was all going into TIAA CREF. And when I bravely reached out to them to make sure that my money was not in fossil fuels. By the way, I had a lot of climate refugee students early, starting in the 90s, and I was quite concerned about this. So I asked, and there was no way to get my funds into out of fossil fuels. There was a social choice, something like that, but it had fossil fuels in it. So that was very disturbing. I worked in many ways. Finally, when I turned 70, I retired, partly because I wanted to get my funds out. I moved most of them, well, into a house I bought with my kids, but then all the rest of them into Everence Financial, which I had learned about through Quaker sources. Everence was started by Mennonites. It's faith-based investing. They're great. I could be sure. They're really wonderful. You can talk to them all the time, much different than CIAA. And nothing is in fossil fuels. However, I wasn't able to take everything out of TIAA because there's some law that leaves some of it there. I've worked with them just this winter. I tried to get a financial advisor there to help me get it out of fossil fuels, and I heard back from him. He declined to meet with me once he knew what I was trying to do. He said, this is a quotation from an email, "Currently, there are no investments on the Minnesota State Colleges and Universities System retirement plans menu that meet your criteria for fossil fuel-free funds. None." That may be changing. I'm now going to screen share. Let's hope I do this really correctly. There. I did join TIAA Divest. I urge you all to do that. If you can go to, let me try to move this out of the way. I don't know if it's in your way too, but it's in my way. You can, especially if you have any funds in TIA, you can take action, sign their petition. It's a great group. I did also write a letter to the editor. It didn't get published, but if you write one, it might. But you can sign on to this. And then there is some good news here. I heard this through a student organization. This just happened in May. These are recommendations approved by the State Board of Investments, Minnesota State Board of Investments, in May. Way at the bottom, it says the board approved the executive director's recommendation to add the following investment belief to SBI's statement of investment beliefs. And here are the words down here. As long-term institutional investors, our fiduciary duty requires us to consider all material risks and opportunities. And in the discussion, they were clear that that related to climate. So this is a big thing. It hasn't changed anything more. This was in the end of May, not long ago. Um, but it's happened, and the Minnesota State Board of Investments controls the colleges and universities funds, which means they're the ones who sign on with TIAA. So that could be very helpful. Students were upset because they did not say it related to the problems of warfare on climate, but at least they began to talk about fossil fuels. So then there are some smaller things. Are they smaller? I don't know. When in Minnesota, I was part of a transition town in St. Anthony Park. Some Minnesotans are here. You probably know about Transition Town Hall, St. Anthony Park. We started a values-based investment club. It is featured here in the Minnesota Women's Press article. All of these things that I'm showing you, I'm showing just to make you a little interested. You'll get links to them all, and then you'll be able to read or look at them more closely later. So these are two of the great women that were leaders of this. We would each put, as it said here, $100 a month into a general fund, and then we decided together, one member, one vote, where to invest that money. That quickly grew. One of the things that I still have money in is Red Lake Solar on Red Lake Indian Reservation. They're putting solar on top of all of their buildings, and we were able to put money into that as well as other things. Most of it I had to leave once I left Minnesota, but the club still exists, and they have here do's and don'ts for starting your own investment club. They will share their incorporation papers and operating agreement, which is great. Now, another thing that happened in Minnesota was, as part of Transition Town, all St. Anthony Park, we started a Transition Your Money group. Now, this was really important to me in another way because I didn't think I had any money, and I was this poor single parent, and I felt really like timid to talk about any of this. But in this neighborhood group, we just get together at a cafe and talk about how we could get the money that was sort of ours into more sustainable, fossil fuel free, and just things. There I could talk with neighbors and friends who actually had more money. And then I found out I actually had these retirement funds, which was a good thing to learn. And we found, like we researched which credit unions and banks would invest only locally. That was very helpful. We checked out other things. This was a group that worked with us. And then since then, they've started a Lion, which is a local investing opportunity network to put money into things locally. So those are things I'm pointing out because they help you think about what you can do on your own and with your neighbors. Then I moved to Washington. In Washington, they did not have, I haven't been able to find a transition town, which was sad for me. And I kind of aged out of Minnesota350.org. But what I aged into was Third Act. Third Act has been great and has one commit. Third Act is for people over 50 who want to really impact the climate crisis. It's Bill McKibben's organization. You probably know about it. We are working on Divest Washington to get Washington State to, so these are Washington's pension funds. They don't use TIA, I don't think, but they, so these are for people who have funds here. However, the way that we're trying to do it in Washington is to get a legislation passed. Mary Lou Dickerson, who was a representative in Washington for many years, is heading this up. We're working with Divest Washington and PSARA, that's the Puget Sound Advocates for Retirement Action. And I've learned, partly through Quaker Voice, that this is a long-term process to get legislative change, but there is progress happening. And it's happened in other states. I'll show you that in a minute. If you don't know about Third Act, it's a good thing to do. We're bringing Bill McKibben here to Washington on July 2nd. And you can, if you go to the Third Act webpage, all these links will be given to you. You can find a working group. If your state doesn't have one, you can start one. Or you can join like the affinity group for faith, people of faith. And now I'm going to show you a few things that Third Act Washington has available and will share. We'll share these with you later. The first one here is the top 4 reasons that you can argue for state investment boards to divest. One of them is that they can no longer compete with clean energy sources. The second is that, as you'll see, the fossil fuel industry is falling behind in its payoffs. And then there are the risks from storm and extreme temperatures. One of those big ones apparently is that as the permafrost melts under pipelines, the pipelines are going to break. They're breaking. And then climate and health risks, especially the way they initially unfairly burden marginalized communities. So this is one handout that will be available to you. This one is longer and includes all the...
We're not seeing them, Renee.
You're not seeing them. Investment. Okay, this is the risks, and it includes links to the research to back up all of these points. So you can click on the blue links and get the research. And then there is one more. I'm going to stop share. I'm going to go to that one, and then I will show you that, which is State Treasurer's comments. For mostly it's West Coast, but New York City is also pretty much up on this. And we will get you that. Here it is. Share. These are from the California State Treasurer, the Oregon State Treasurer, the Washington State Treasurer, who is working on this with the whole Washington State, and then from New York City. So those are the things I wanted to show you, and that's my quick, how me as a little person got involved in money. I don't have much, but working with all these wonderful friends, we were able to talk with people who have some, and then I was able to take I'm much, I'm a white American. I actually do have money, and I've been able to move that. There, I think that's it for me. Thank you all.
Thank you, Renee. Before we go into general questions and answers, I want to invite the other panelists to ask Renee questions or have add information that they might want to give us. If you have any comments at all, raise your hand one way or another, and we'll recognize you. Pamela.
Yeah, you mentioned looking for the good credit unions and local banks that people might want to be working with. And I came across this really great group called Better Banking Options, that if people are thinking about moving money, that they would be well served by taking a look at it. In any locality, they do a kind of a annotated list of different financial institutions.
Thank you, Pamela. Anybody else? Questions or comments of the other panelists, Lena, Janet? Not to put you on the spot. There are no open questions in the Q&A. But if you have a question that you didn't put in the Q&A, feel free to raise your hand and you can just say it yourself.
I want to just add that I I don't think there are always questions that are important. Some of you may have an important thing to say that isn't a question, and I can go on Q&A too. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, your resources. Bruce, thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Very, very interesting. I just want to mention one other resource. It's an investment group called Prentice Smith and Company. I had most of my retirement funds in TIAA, and I took them all. I went through the same thing with TIAA, and there was no way they could meet my concerns. So I took all my money out of TIAA and I put it in Prentice Smith. This is a small, well, not terribly small. I guess they responsible for investments in the range of 700 million or so, but initially family-run investment firms that got started in the 80s, and I believe by 20 years ago they had decided to go completely free of fossil fuel investments. So they've been free of those kind of investments for a long time, and they do a very good job. Their website is make sure I have it right. I think it's Prentice-Smith, or you can just Google Prentice Smith and Company. Prentice is spelled P as in Peter, R-E-N as in Nancy, T-I-S-S, two S's there, and then Smith, that's another S, M-I-T-H, and Company. And our son Ethan worked there for a number of years, and that prepared him. He was just hired away by Friends Fiduciary, where he's now the executive director of Friends Fiduciary. But it's a very good group.
Thank you, Bruce. If you can, would you put that link in the chat for people?
I'll work at that. I think I can figure out how to do that. Sure. Good idea.
Thank you.
Already in there.
Is it? Thank you, David. I can't see all the raised hands because I can only see about half of you on the front screen, but I don't think there are any others. And if there are no other questions, there's no reason why we can't just move on to our next panelist. We may have more questions there. We'll welcome the time. So next, I want to introduce Lena Blount. Lena is an organizer, trainer, and nonviolent action strategist who's been working on environmental justice campaigns in the Philadelphia area for over a decade. And she currently serves as the Director of Strategy and Partnerships with Earth Quaker Action Team, which some of you may know as EQAT. She originally is from the Pacific Northwest, and she says she loves spending time around trees and mountains. She considers herself a Quaker, and she considers EQAT her primary spiritual community. Thank you so much, Lena, for joining us.
Thank you all so much for having me. I've also just been delighted by the new faces, some of the familiar faces. I see Sue Tiedemann, who I sang with at Durham Friends meeting a couple weeks ago, which was very sweet. Really nice to be with you all. I have been thinking a lot about what I wanted to share on this panel, and something that increasingly came to me as important is just how much this kind of action has deepened my spiritual life, and I think has helped enrich a spiritual community that I didn't even really know I was looking for. When I was first introduced to political action and Quakerism, I wasn't really looking for either. I was a student at Bryn Mawr College, right outside of Philadelphia. I was an athlete. My roommate was much more involved in environmental action than I was, and kind of dragged me along to a training at the Friends Center downtown that the Earth Quaker Action Team was facilitating. This was back in 2011. Around the Bank Like Appalachia Matters campaign, focusing on PNC Bank and their investments in mountaintop removal coal mining. And I didn't have words for this at the time, but it really was kind of a way-opening moment for me. I almost felt like I was like levitating in that room. I was studying urban planning. My dad was a civil engineer. I had a really kind of material concern for how we make systems that work for people and are more just. And in my studies and research and things I was working on as a student, I was just increasingly seeing that we had a lot of technical solutions to problems relating to climate change, problems relating to the distribution of resources, and often what was in the way was political will and sometimes outright cruelty of people, but oftentimes just systems that encourage greed and profit over the well-being of individuals and communities. So that very first EQAT training back in 2011, folks might remember, if you're following along at home, was about 3 or 4 months before Occupy broke onto the scene. And so for me, it was this real awakening and drawing into questioning why these systems were the way they were. And being in a community that could sit with me in discernment, in action. My very first Quaker worship was sitting in a PNC bank lobby. It was quite, I remember afterward, I asked someone, I was like, well, how do you know if it's really powerful worship or if it's just adrenaline? And they're like, what a good question. What do you think? And I was like, I don't even know where to begin to answer that question. And so it was just a really welcoming community for me to explore my own spiritual practice. I sat in my very first clearness committee with the Earth Quaker Action Team. And we continue to take action at this intersection of economy and the environment. I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about our current campaign, because for me, it really is about discernment and clarity and faith. And there's a little bit of a different scale than PNC Bank and mountaintop removal coal mining. At the time of the PNC Bank campaign, they were one of the largest investors in mountaintop removal coal mining, but they're a mid-sized U.S. bank. They have about $4 billion with a B assets under management. In 2021, when folks internationally were starting to look at the big asset managers, and more and more of environmental organizing was turning toward fossil fuel finance, EQAT was also in discernment about what campaign to pick up next. Between the PNC Bank campaign and this current campaign focusing on Vanguard, we had taken on our electrical utility here in southeastern Pennsylvania. Folks might be familiar with our efforts around PICO. But right as we were trying to discern our role in stepping away from that campaign, we felt we had pushed it as far as we could into legislative channels, and that this, piece of nonviolent direct action maybe was being called to be put to use elsewhere. Right around that same time, we were invited into conversation with a number of groups who are really wrestling with the role of financial institutions, and we're turning their attention to Vanguard. Similar to PNC Bank, there were some access points. PNC was founded by this merger of Quaker Bank and another bank, so lots of Quaker institutions were connected to PNC. It felt like a place where we were called to take action. And similarly, Vanguard here in southeastern Pennsylvania is a place where many of us have access points. I had money in Vanguard. I had friends from college who worked there. Just about everyone within EQAT knows someone who works there, someone who has invested there for years, or someone who really respects Bogle and this idea that, the everyman can have access to the collective wealth of this system. And so it felt like we had this relationship that we were being called into deeper connection, deeper accountability, and in some ways solidarity to call on this, in some ways local, in some ways massively not local, institution to do better by their professed values. I'm going to share the screen here a little bit, but one thing I want to emphasize is that EQAT is a part of an international campaign. I joked about the differences in scale, but the differences in scale are massive. Vanguard is the second largest asset manager in the world. They manage almost 9 trillion with a T assets. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and what that means in terms of their responsibility to take action. But the name of the international campaign is Vanguard SOS. So EQAT is one of dozens of groups who are a part of this effort, and I'll talk a little more about that. So why Vanguard? This slide is even out of date. It's gone up. We're looking at more like 9 trillion versus 8 trillion. And because of their business model, they're also one of the largest shareholders in nearly every single public company in the United States. So that also means they have incredible influence, and what they do matters. They lag behind their peers in a couple of really significant ways. You know, we're talking about TIAA. There's other asset managers who certainly could be doing better, but Vanguard truly is sincerely one of the worst in terms of their performance on shareholder resolutions. They consistently rank amongst the worst, and they lag far beyond their peers, including behind BlackRock, behind State Street, around the support for shareholder resolutions and the quantity of funds that they market, emphasized here on market, as socially and environmentally sustainable. A couple other details here on this slide. They have over 300 billion invested in fossil fuels, about 87 billion in fossil fuel expansion projects alone, and their support for environmental and socially minded shareholder resolutions has been consistently going down. So in 2022, they supported about 12% of shareholder resolutions. In 2023, just 2%, as you can see on the slide here. Now, one thing about these numbers, 300 billion invested in fossil fuels, that does make them the largest global investor in fossil fuels from the asset management side. So they really are a big player. But you might notice from 9 trillion to 300 billion, we're really talking fractions of their portfolio. So unlike Exxon and Chevron, for whom their entire business model is extraction, we think they're a compelling target precisely because they could be doing other things. And as asset managers, their professed responsibility is managing risk. And so social movements can provide further risk. Climate change certainly is further risk. We can talk more about that. They fail to take significant climate action. I talked a little bit about these funds they market as sustainable. Now, if you use tools like ASIC's Investigate tool and you look up all of the socially marketed funds with Vanguard, or you use tools like As You Sow that looks at all of the fossil fuel investments, fossil fuel insurance and finance components, not a single one of these very few funds does well on both of those metrics. So again, they're doing way less than their peers, and when you actually lift up the hood, those funds are actually not including all the things we would hope they would. They include several things we hope they wouldn't. So this 0.38% of their total assets under management in these funds they market as sustainable also aren't doing quite the things that we would hope those types of funds would actually do. So EQAT has taken action. Over almost 3 years, we've taken over 40 actions at their Vanguard headquarters in Malvern, Pennsylvania. We've gone to their offices in North Carolina. We call points of destruction are places where there's a major Vanguard investment. And because of their business model, I can guarantee there are points of destruction in your backyard that Vanguard is invested in. We know they're a major investor in EQT and Equitrans, the two big companies behind the Mountain Valley Pipeline. They're a major investor in Total. They're a major investor in Citigroup, which is one of the largest bankings invested in the expansion of plastics and LNG in the Gulf South. So their hands are in many things, and if you have specific questions, I'd be happy to answer. This isn't just through passive investment, though that's their brand. Their brand is passive investment index funds. But this is also through a lot of active choices. They're making purchasing bonds. A resource that I'll make sure gets to you all in the follow-up is a report from the Sierra Club about the expansion of bonds as a tool to fuel fossil fuel expansion and how much Vanguard is exposed to some of the worst fossil fuel expansion projects through their purchasing of bonds. And there's some ways this summer that you can join us in action. On July 3rd, Wednesday of Friends General Conference, we're going to be taking a road trip. We have some buses booked and planned to take folks from just off of Haverford campus. So if you're not attending the gathering, you're able to catch those buses as well. We'll take those buses off to Malvern, where we'll hear from some of these frontline voices of people directly impacted by the Mountain Valley Pipeline, by the East Africa crude oil pipeline, by the incinerator in Chester and these other projects that Vanguard's invested in. And it's a little bit of a welcome party, you could say. Vanguard has chosen a new CEO for the very first time in their over 50-year history. That is an outsider, someone who's never worked at Vanguard before. His name is Salim Ramji. He's an executive coming from BlackRock. He has said some things that sound good about climate. So this is a really important time to be crystal clear on what is actually needed for Vanguard to change course on their climate impacts. We have already over 110, I checked today, over 110 people have registered to join us for this action. We hope you can join us too. And if you're a Vanguard customer, I really hope you will consider moving your money. We need to draw a bright line in the sand right now because Vanguard has been getting worse. Their shareholder support of environmental resolutions is going down. They left and publicly defended their one climate commitment and are clearly responding to pressure from the right. So it's time to really call forward a different vision for what we actually want them to do. And when we talk about money and climate, I do think where our retirements are, where we invest, are a really profound place to get in touch with our values, because unlike credit cards, where the ways these companies are profiting and using our money to expand fossil fuels is, you know, in the margins, in the transactional details. When it comes to our retirement or investments, it's really, what do we feel comfortable profiting off of? And that's a really personal decision. I've been honored by all the folks who've come to our Money Moving webinars and have grappled with what that means to them. Oftentimes, these are cross-class conversations. Sometimes folks who, you know, like me, were so thrilled to finally get a job where they had a retirement account and a, you know, company match. And some folks for whom this is money they inherited from a loved one. And so we're having these really, you know, people don't think it's very polite to talk about politics or money or religion at the dinner table. And we get to have these conversations where we talk about all of it. And it's really, really a gift. And it is an act of faith, I think, to take on the second largest asset manager in the world and lay out a vision, believing they can change for the better. And that is the spirit through which we take this action. You know, people sometimes ask me, you know, you use the word opponent or target in the campaign. You know, is that not seeing that of God in the executives at Vanguard? And I often think of Walter Sullivan, who really is one of the people who brought me into EQAT, sat with me in my first clearness committee and my second clearness committee. And what he says is, I'm loving them so hard. I'm loving them so hard that I believe that we share these values for a livable future and that they could do more to step toward them. So those are some of the ways you could get involved with us. That's a little bit of my story with EQAT. And I'll take a breath there and really welcome questions, really welcome conversation, maybe as it unfolds, if it can't be now.
Thank you, Lena. I've taken part in a number of your actions at Vanguard, and each one was different and each one was really powerful. I wonder if you could just give us an idea of what you're planning for July 3rd, what's going to be special about that, especially if there are people here who think they'll get to Friends General Conference and are considering whether they want to come or not.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for asking, Ruth. It's going to be a really beautiful action in part because we're bringing so many folks together. So I mentioned the frontline voices of folks impacted. Our vision is to meet just off of Vanguard's main corporate campus to begin at a park where we might have a stage and some sound equipment so we can really hear the voices of folks who are coming from a distance to talk about the impact of these investments in their lives. And then our vision is to march together to the entrance and to have chairs set up for worship. And we're trying to figure out how to maybe 100 chairs, maybe 150 chairs to sit and worship for a vision of a livable planet. And that as this new CEO, Salim Ramji, steps into leadership, he may be moved to embrace a vision of a livable future. And then we'll walk back to the park and depart. There will be buses from FGC as well as some buses coming down from New York. This is not an action where we are preparing to risk arrest. It is an action where we want to show up as boldly as we can without being called to cross that line this time.
Thank you. I wonder if any of our other panelists have comments or questions for Lena before I get to a few questions in the Q&A.
Ruth, I'm just noting that we're at time. I'm wondering if we should
Okay.
pick up those
Thank you,
questions.
Pamela. Maybe we will move on to the next panelist, and then if time sort of opens up toward the end, then we'll come back to these questions. So thank you, Lena. Thank you, Pamela. We're going to move on to Janet Anderson. Janet grew up in Colorado and studied civil and environmental engineering, cutting her activist teeth on the nuclear freeze movement. And activism has been, and she's been interested in energy and environment issues ever since. She's been active in Northern Yearly Meeting for 40 years and has taught first day school this year at Twin Cities Friends Meeting. So Janet, thank you for being here tonight.
You have to unmute.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you everybody else for being here. I'm going to talk about, my little group is called Divest Invest Minnesota, and we are working on trying to get the State Board of Investment, which I'm sorry, my computer is adding something I don't want. There we go. Renee mentioned the State Board of Investment and had the nice thing where they got a new belief that fiduciary responsibility includes more risks. We're trying to get them to, we're mostly retired public employees, but we do have a few active employees and a few people who maybe weren't public employees. We're trying to get them not to be in fossil fuels. Our group is, I've been with them maybe 3 years, and we have such a variety of skills that what was said there at the beginning about working together is really important to the working of our group. We have some people with legal skill. We have people who know their way around the legislature and how to do lobbying. We have a retired school social worker, and we have, I'm the engineer, we have a chemist. So one thing that is really different between our group and the people at the State Board of Investment is those interests, which are like sort of, you know, for them it seems to all come down to the bottom line. And it's really hard to shake them off that the value of the natural world, or you know, you might think about science when you make these decisions, or you might think about the social welfare when you make these decisions. That's kind of a hard thing. We too are sort of the children of McKibben. A number of us came through at MN 350 before this was kind of a spin-off, but we're not part of MN 350 anymore. Okay, we've had a change of okay, there's two ways. The State Board of Investment is officially the governor and 3 of his top people. But it also means the agency that manages the funds. So I'll try to be clear about that. I don't want it to be confusing. The executive director is a newer person, and the former person was actively hostile to our cause. The newer person is outwardly friendly, and we're not too sure about the rest of it. She is at least willing to meet with us, and she brings 6 or 7 of her top paid guys to come and sit with her and us. So that's a really different thing, and that is it's very slow work. It's very slow going. She says that we have made a difference, that she's learned some things from us, and that change in belief that Renee highlighted might be one of those things. So we can talk to them, it has to get set up, and it's not every month or anything, but that can happen. We also have the opportunity to go and speak the formal meetings with the governor and the auditor and the Secretary of State and the AG. That happens every quarter. And pretty much that's they read the agenda and that's a rubber stamp it. But they allow half an hour at the end for public comment. We have to register ahead of time to get in. And usually you get 5 minutes. But in the last couple of meetings, there have been so many people who want to talk about Israel and Gaza that they group us together, and they still stick it try to stick it to the 30 minutes. So, and they never answer. They almost never say anything back. So that's kind of it can feel powerful to make a good statement there. And I think that does matter. All the elected people there that I'm talking about are Democrats, and we have met with them separately, and they are privately and, somewhat publicly supportive, but they are also vulnerable to political pressure. And Minnesota is on Trump's hit list right now. Okay, so that's kind of like about direct meeting, trying to influence the State Board of Investment directly. Then there's trying to work through the legislature to pass laws to make things better. One change that was made in the law was we limited the amount of thermal coal that can be in the portfolio. And some thermal coal stocks did get sold. There are still the thresholds the thresholds for getting rid of stuff is not as high or as low. I mean, it's not as much as we would like. So there is still some thermal coal, and there is also the kind of coal that's used in making steel. So we've met with legislators, and even more than the governor and his friends, the legislators can be wussy. They can say, they can be really friendly and positive to your face, and then when it comes to leading the committee or something, they back down. And we've never met with like a majority of legislators. We try to pick people who are on the committee that cares about the Commission on Pensions, or the people who are serve our districts. Okay, so then there's another step down is to try and reach out to the public employees, mostly through the unions. That's not been very successful, except for the teachers union. And the teachers are like, yeah, sure, of course we agree with you. We want a world for the kids. But it's really hard to get the AFSCME or the professional employees, professional level people on board with us. We just recently started to learn about private equity, and we're pretty appalled about that. I don't know. Show me your hand if you know what private equity is, just so I know kind of how to meet the audience here. Okay, about half is what I'm seeing. Private equity exists because of the regulations that public companies have to comply with. And so private equity exists in this place where there are very few rules. They don't have to report to the SEC. They don't show up on Wall Street. They don't have to have public papers you can go and look at. Sometimes they can do really good things, like they can take a really good business that is struggling because it doesn't have good management or it doesn't have good marketing, and they know what to do and they can fix it. They also can just buy stuff. I mean, if you invest in private equity, they promise you they're going to give you, 8% or whatever it is. And now they've got to turn the money over to you, but they also make more than that themselves. They make quite a lot up in private equity. Okay, that's just I hope not to be confusing about that. It has taken a while for me to comprehend it and wrap my mind around different pieces of this. We don't like them because they also buy up going concerns and suck them dry, and then leave the community to bear the cost of people who lost their jobs, people who lost their pensions, businesses that are closed and vacant. There are several huge examples of that way of functioning. And also they have taken over many kinds of businesses where there's a steady flow of cash that gives them their way to pay, but then they cut the wages, or they cut the pensions, and they cut the quality of care or the quality of whatever it is that they're offering, so that then your nursing homes and your child care are not as good as they used to be. People are dying more and things cost more, and they're just not as good. So the social side of that's not good, and it really exacerbates the wealth divide by making the people who run the private equity rich and really impoverishing the lowest people. Okay, we also discovered that there's a lot of private equity invested in the fossil resources that some of the bigger fossil fuel companies are getting rid of. There's a lot of pressure on some of them, we don't want you in Saskatchewan, or we don't want you in tar sands, or whatever it is. They sell it to private equity, and private equity continues to run it without the regulations that a public company is subject to. So, then Renee, can you share that same page where you had the beliefs? Because if you just pop it up whenever you can. Within the last year or so, the State Board of Investment agreed to, there was a limit of 25% of how much private equity could be in the portfolio. And they said, let's make it a range. And so now it's like between 25 and 36% or something. And every quarter they are adding and it's right on that same page. It shows, it's like 250 million going to KKR and 100 million going to somebody else. And KKR is one of the worst, some of the worst emissions. Yep, right. This private markets thing, keep going down a little bit. Yeah, right here. So, I don't really know what are these realty and what these things are, but KKR is not a really, it's big and they have huge emissions. So this is, you know, while we're happy about the thing down below that Renee commented on, and and that the director did say now we agree that fiduciary duty includes the climate, we don't see much change.
Janet,
Yes.
hi, it's Ruth. I hate to do this, but I think you've run out of time, and I want to be sure that we have time for Pamela. And then, since we haven't had a lot of time for Q&A, we want to have a little at the end and some time for each of you panelists to do a quick wrap up. And so I apologize, but I think we'll have to move on to Pamela. And Pamela, for
Ruth,
those of you
may
who
I
don't
say
know,
one thing?
Sure.
I've sent some links, some resources to Claire, and so look for those things in the chat.
Thank you so much, Janet.
Thank you.
Pamela is a member of Central Philadelphia Meeting and has a passion for the earth and economic integrity, loves repair of all kinds, and has spoken and published widely on faith and witness. Her books include Money and Soul, The Promise of Right Relationship, Tending Sacred Ground, Respectful Parenting, and she has 3 volumes of poetry. I want to thank Pamela for pulling this wonderful program together tonight and for being one of our panelists.
Well, thank you, Ruth. I just wanted to start by saying that one thing that we haven't mentioned is engaging with the closer in institutions we're part of, like our Quaker meetings that have investments, and working with them not only to divest from bads like fossil fuels, but to actively invest in goods like sustainable energy and green jobs. And if anybody works with philanthropic groups, there's also a challenge not only to do good work with the interest from their endowments, but to invest the principal in line with their values. There's so many possibilities. But the particular project I wanted to focus on is less directly connected to climate than any of the others, but it addresses this wider issue of where money that is diverted from bad actors can be invested for the public good. So the group I'm part of, the Philadelphia Public Banking Coalition, and we'll have a link to that sometime, starts with a really wide vision of money as a public utility rather than a for-profit commodity. And we've been working to create a public bank in Philadelphia that would hold our tax dollars and other public funds, lending them to address public needs with the interest coming back to be lent again and again. And what a sharp contrast to the current situation where our public tax dollars are held by big banks and end up being sucked out of the city to be invested across the globe, wherever the banks can make the highest profit. And one of the reasons our city is so poor, I've recently learned, is that an unusually high percentage of our total individual and institutional accounts are in the big banks, rather than in local and regional financial institutions that lend more locally. So several years ago, our coalition organized to get City Council to vote overwhelmingly for laying the foundations for a public bank in Philadelphia. That effort, unfortunately, has been blocked by a mayor. We have a strong mayor system who doesn't want to tangle with the financial industry. But not ones to give up. We've pivoted to a more general bring our money home campaign. Part of this campaign involves our city pension fund. There you can see the pension fund link, and bringing some of that money home. The fund is valued at $8 billion. And while high-risk financial products are well represented in the portfolio, none of that money is invested locally. So we're now challenging City Council to direct the pension fund to allocate just 2% of its funds, about $168 million, to local housing, cooperative development, and green investments. They're great models of city pension funds investing locally that we can build on, and New York City is a big one. And there are many examples of economically targeted investments that offer safe and reliable returns while meeting pressing local needs. I noted there was one question about, can you get returns investing this way? And the answer is you can. We're really pleased to have an op-ed on our proposal in the Philadelphia Inquirer this winter, and there'll be a link to that as well. So it's been exciting to start working closely with the staff of two progressive city council members, along with community activists who are deeply invested in getting more funds directed locally. And together we're working on a strategy to build support in both council and the community. And I'm looking forward to our next meeting, which is tomorrow. Sorry, I couldn't report on it here. So how do I love this campaign? Let me count the ways. I love getting at the roots of big systems and looking for points of leverage. You don't have to dig far in any social or environmental issue to get to economics. And when you dig down in economics, you always get to finance. I love the model of public banking and the story of the success of the Public Bank of North Dakota, now over 100 years old. I could go on, but I'll put some links to the public banking stuff there as well. I love the simplicity of the concept of public banking, the ease of understanding, even as it challenges entrenched assumptions about the way things have to be. The financial institutions that hold our public tax dollars should be using them not for private profit, but in a way that supports the public good. I love how modest and reasonable our pension fund ask sounds. Just 2% of the entire portfolio, hardly anything really. But a win would be a very significant foot in the door, and we know what to do next. I love, this is speaking to what Janet just said, I love having a way to respond to the appalling truth that our retirement and pension funds are being used, mostly without our knowledge and surely without our consent, to prop up the fossil fuel industry. To the extent that big banks have succumbed to pressure to divest, private equity managers have moved in quickly with our retirement funds to keep the oil and gas flowing without interruption. And in the face of such an outrage, it's good to feel like an actor and not just a helpless victim. I love working on the other half of the puzzle that other climate activists are focusing on with their fossil fuel divestment campaigns, offering a model of what to do with all that freed up money by calling on our pension funds to invest locally in community needs that include green energy and environmental justice projects. I love the way people in the community who care about housing and jobs and safety and livable neighborhoods can so easily see their interests in this campaign. One of the folks who's really excited about it is an anti-gun violence person who just sees the need to invest in community. On a more immediate level, I love learning that I can be a player in city decision-making beyond just voting and protesting. I always thought that the city was just too big and that I was just too small. And I love our group. We're a feisty dozen or so who have vision and tenacity and political and economic depth, who can roll with change and who just don't give up. We're all quite imperfect human beings. We irritate each other at times, but deeply appreciate each other's gifts. We laugh together and we've grown to love each other. We start each meeting checking in on how we're doing. Then our facilitator offers a grounding poem. So how many secular campaigns with the goal of upending the financial system in pursuit of justice and a livable climate start with a poem? So that's my story, and I'm really delighted to have this opportunity to share it with you.
Thank you so much, Pamela. I just checked and there are no open questions because the questions are the Q&A changes with each presenter. So what I'm hoping we can do now is give each of the panelists time to do a quick wrap up, and then maybe that will answer some questions, but we'll have a little time for questions and answers after that. Does anyone of you four want to go first, or should I just put you back in the order you started? Let's go with Renee then.
Well, I love the way the political empowerment comes into this, because something I just mentioned was Quaker Voice here in Washington that is very active. I became clerk of the Environmental Stewardship Working Group of Quaker Voice here, and it has been wonderful because we meet with legislators and we champion bills and get them passed. And if we can bring these two things together, it's really very empowering, both talking to others about money and then being involved directly in politics. So I'm glad that's come up. That's my main comment.
Thank you, Renee. Lena, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I'll just briefly address some of the questions that have been asked, because there is some follow-up. Bill Cousins from Philadelphia asked how much of Vanguard's $300 billion in fossil fuels is managed as part of their own mutual funds or in these actively managed funds, exchange-traded funds or otherwise, versus stocks owned by Vanguard members who use Vanguard as their broker, which is a big part of their business. And the honest answer is I'm not confident to share the split. It is something I could find out and try and follow up on. One thing we do know is that their active funds, both in ETFs and purchasing of bonds, investment in fossil fuels is a portion that is growing. So I can say that. And then just wanted to thank Muriel asked about how corporations evaluate or calculate ESG. And I shared a link to an Investopedia article. There's a couple different bodies that have criteria. Morningstar has some, but one of the hard things is there's not an agreed upon definition. So companies can say it's an ESG fund and just be defining that themselves. So you really have to, unfortunately, use tools like As You Sow or AFSC's Investigate tool to see what's actually in those funds. It's not a standard across the industry. And then there was also just a question about how well do alternative funds and banks do financially. The University of Waterloo has two reports recently. One looked at public pension funds. The more recent one looks at private the big tech companies. It looks at Google, Microsoft, and their retirement funds also would have done better had they actually screened out fossil fuel expansion from their portfolio. So University of Waterloo is a great resource for some of that. And thank you so much for your time, everyone.
Thank you, Lena. That means next would be Janet. Do you have any comments or a wrap up you'd like to give us, or do you see some questions you want to answer?
I don't see any questions. I want to say this is going to be a long haul. The executive director here is thinking in decades, and we're like, no, we got to be acting really soon here. Last year would have been better. And I want to say that AVP training is helping me a lot with staying calm with whatever's going on and noticing the beauty of the world and like how many different bugs and birds there are. And I'm thinking about the Buddhist concepts of when things aren't working right, you take refuge in the Sangha, the community, or you take refuge in the practice, and you take refuge in the Buddha, which means like keep working and sit back and don't get too excited. It's kind of like if we fail, humans may not survive, but the earth and other things will. And if that's the choice that humans collectively make, that could be true. Take time to notice what's beautiful today. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. You answered a question I was going to ask the panelists, which is, we say we're in this for the long haul, and we'd say that we should have done this 10 years ago. So how do you all stay motivated and committed to the work? And that was a beautiful answer. I'm sure the rest of you have answers too. But let's go to Pamela, Pamela, in addition to your own comments, I wondered if you could just wrap up for the evening.
Oh my goodness. Sure. I think this is largely a group of Quakers. And so I was reminded that Quakers in general feel very confident to step in around issues of war and peace and bring our values right into the public conversation. But we get kind of shy around money and economics and finance, and we kind of maybe feel like we don't understand that much, or the experts know better, and we should kind of whatever. And so I think it's just so important that we feel like we have a right to step into the territory of economics and money with our values intact. You know, what is right and what is important and what matters. And the economic system was created by human beings. It's not something that's beyond our abilities to understand or to change. So I think it's that our faith values are really, really important in this project. And I think that our understanding of the importance of community, I think is really critical as well, that we can't do this as individuals. It matters that we do things as individuals, but we can't make the difference that needs to happen as individuals. I loved what Janet said about getting AVP skills, alternatives to violence training, to be able to find our way as we work in groups and not get knocked off balance, and find our way to love people who also irritate us. And so I think those are important skills as well. So I guess the sum up would be, oh, you know, I really like, oh my goodness, I could say so much. I like whoever said that despair is an insult to the future, that we get to have our feelings, but it doesn't really make sense to act on them if we care about this earth and about the human beings that are on it and will be on it in the future. And it's so much more fun, I think. Being in motion is so much more satisfying than being kind of passive, victimized witnesses. So it's like, let's have good lives for ourselves. Let's get together and get in motion and just do the very best we can.
Thank you so much, Pamela. We do have a little time to let you know that this has been recorded if you came in after we announced that, and we will be making the recording available as part of a follow-up to the program. We have your email if you registered, and you wouldn't be here if you hadn't, unless you borrowed somebody else's link. But since everybody seems to have their own name, I think we have your email. And we will be sending along information from the chat, which we will probably edit so that you don't get the whole thing. I don't know if we will be able to submit to our panelists questions that we didn't get to tonight, but I think we'll try to do that. And if we're able to do that, we will include those questions and answers in the follow-up too. And I wonder if there are any quick questions from the audience about resources or information you'd like to have right now, either about the EQAT action or any one of the other campaigns that people have spoken about tonight, so that you can do something before you get the follow-up information. And if you raise your electronic hand, I'm more likely to see you because I have two screens here that I'm trying to juggle, and the electronic hand will bring you right up to the top of my screen.
I think this
But
is also
if,
fun if people have
go ahead.
people have additional resources that they'd like to share.
Yes, if you have resources that you can put in the chat, that will be very helpful. But you also have, I think that your confirmation, was that from you, Claire? Or can people reach out to you with additional resources? Is your email in the chat maybe? That
I
might.
will put my email in the chat right now. And
So if
guys-
you have additional information that you'd like to share with the whole group, if you email it to Claire, she will, she'll make sure that we include that as part of our follow-up email. If there are no other questions or comments, maybe we could close with a little bit of silence and gratitude for all the work that all of you are doing and for all the information that you shared with us tonight. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to Pamela for organizing this. Thanks again to Quaker Earth Care Witness for spreading the word for us. And thank you, Claire, for all of your tech support and other support. Yeah, it's good to see so many familiar faces. And as Pamela said, new faces. I hope we'll see you again.